The woman straightened her coat as she entered the magnificent bank she had constructed from the very foundation. The chandeliers shimmered with brilliance. The marble floors shimmered with a polished elegance. Yet, an unsettling sensation lingered. As she made her way to the counter, the manager's icy stare met her with an unsettling intensity. "We do not cater to individuals of your kind," he scoffed, scrutinizing her simple clothing. A stillness enveloped the space. Unbeknownst to everyone, she held the position of CEO. Moments later, an extraordinary event occurred, a force that would transform everything. Before we dive in, please give this video a thumbs up and let us know your location in the comments. Your support enables us to share more impactful narratives. Let us commence. The woman inhaled deeply as she entered the bank's magnificent lobby, the very space she had imagined years earlier when she began crafting her empire. The soaring ceilings, the graceful chandeliers, the immaculate marble floors, all echoed a sense of achievement. As she stood there, overlooked, clad in a modest coat and scarf, she came to understand how differently the world appeared from the outside. She approached the counter, anticipating the familiar warm greeting that had been customary in corporate meetings. Instead, she encountered a chilling gaze from the branch manager. He hardly looked at her before he spoke, his tone laced with annoyance. "It's not acceptable to simply stroll in and anticipate immediate assistance. Do you actually possess an account?" A handful of individuals in the lobby glanced over. She sensed their critical gazes sweeping over her, presuming she was out of place. With a calm demeanor, she retrieved her bank card and slid it across the table to him. "I do," she replied, her voice steady and composed. The manager sneered, hardly giving the card a second look. "There are valid reasons behind the existence of minimum balance requirements. Individuals such as yourself might find better options at smaller banks rather than here." A wave of disbelief washed over her. Could this truly be unfolding? She dedicated years to making certain that this bank offered outstanding customer service, ensuring that everyone was treated equally, regardless of their appearance. And yet here she stood, cast aside as if she were a mere passerby. She adjusted her stance, opting to push him a bit more. "I need to make a withdrawal," she stated, her tone steady and resolute. The manager released a weary sigh, shaking his head in disbelief. "I really can't afford to waste time on this right now. We have genuine clients to cater to. If you find it challenging to uphold the expectations of this institution, I recommend considering your departure." A quiet stillness enveloped the lobby. The colleagues at adjacent desks exchanged furtive glances, yet remained silent. Onlookers observed with curiosity, hesitant to step in. She observed the manager, taking in the air of superiority in his stance. He was completely unaware of her identity. He failed to recognize the woman whose insight had transformed this bank into one of the most prosperous financial institutions in the nation. She dedicated years to cultivating a reputation grounded in integrity. Yet here stood a man, one of her own team members, dismantling that vision in mere seconds. She cast a quick look at his name tag. "Is it Mr. Calloway?" she inquired, his demeanor remaining almost unchanged. He muttered, "I fail to see how that's pertinent." With a deliberate breath, she reached into her bag and retrieved her phone. With a few swift taps, she unlocked a secure application reserved exclusively for high-ranking executives. After a few swipes, the employee records appeared before her. Mr. Calloway's name appeared alongside his performance evaluations. Numerous complaints had surfaced, a series of customer service issues, moments where he had left clients feeling uneasy, yet no action had been taken until this point. She locked eyes with him, observing the impatience simmering within them. He remained blissfully unaware, yet he was on the brink of discovering the truth in a manner that would etch itself into his memory forever. Mr. Calloway released a frustrated sigh, drumming his fingers on the counter as though she were squandering his precious moments. He had already cast her aside in his thoughts, believing she was merely another inconsequential patron who would soon depart. Unbeknownst to him, each moment of his hubris was quietly determining his destiny. She maintained her composure, watching him intently. The way he scarcely met her gaze, the way his stance oozed arrogance, it all indicated that this was not the first instance of his disdainful treatment towards another. How many others had he looked down upon? How many clients had left feeling utterly embarrassed because of him? She clenched her phone tightly. "I would like to speak to someone in charge," she said finally, her voice steady yet composed. Mr. Calloway wore a sly grin. "I hold the position of branch manager." He declared with undeniable pride that there was no one above him here. She arched an eyebrow. "Is there no regional supervisor? Is there no corporate representative available?" He inclined his body a bit, softening his tone. "Listen, I'm not sure what sort of game you're engaging in, but this is a prestigious establishment. We only engage with those who truly belong in this space. If you don't have anything meaningful to contribute, I recommend you exit before I involve security." A shadow of something ominous flickered in her gaze, yet she maintained her poise. She stepped back, surveyed the employees in the vicinity, and observed how they averted their gazes, feigning ignorance of the unfolding situation. The onlookers in the lobby observed with intrigue, their eyes flitting back and forth between her and the manager. The atmosphere was charged, palpable with an unvoiced confrontation. She retrieved her phone once more, her fingers dancing quickly across the screen as she accessed the direct contact number for the bank's executive division. She hit the call button. Mr. Calloway let out a derisive laugh. "Who are you actually reaching out to?" She remained silent, the phone pressed against her ear. In mere moments, a voice responded from the other end. "Excuse me, Ms. Lawson?" The instant the voice acknowledged her, a palpable wave seemed to ripple through the atmosphere. The workers at the adjacent desks tensed up. The patrons, who had been silently watching until now, leaned in a bit, sensing an unforeseen twist. "Indeed," she stated, her voice imbued with a commanding presence. "I find myself at the downtown branch. An issue has arisen that demands prompt attention." The voice on the other end was unwavering. "I'll arrive in 5 minutes." She concluded the call, tucking the phone away in her bag before meeting Mr. Calloway's gaze, which remained fixed on her with a puzzled look, as if he were still trying to comprehend the recent exchange. "Just 5 minutes," she stated plainly. His smirk wavered. "What is happening? You have that much time before everything shifts dramatically." For the first time, doubt danced in his gaze. The change in ambience was unmistakable. Workers began to murmur quietly to one another. Patrons shared knowing looks, aware that an important moment was in the air. Mr. Calloway cleared his throat and straightened his posture, attempting to assert his authority once more. "I'm not sure what you expect will unfold, but..." Just as he was about to complete his thought, the glass doors of the bank burst open unexpectedly. A cadre of impeccably attired figures entered, their aura demanding instant recognition. The atmosphere grew hushed as they made their way to the heart of the lobby. In that instant, the expression on Mr. Calloway's face shifted at last. The bank lobby exuded an air of stillness as the impeccably attired figures moved forward. Their polished shoes resonated on the marble floor, each step a quiet proclamation of power. The atmosphere was laden with an almost palpable heaviness. Workers who had been feigning productivity now paused, and patrons felt the anticipation of an extraordinary moment about to unfold. Leading the group was a tall figure with silver-streaked hair, his expression a mystery, yet his mere presence commanded respect. Every employee identified him without hesitation. This was Richard Hayes, the director for the region. The very presence of him ignited a spark among the staff. He rarely dropped by unexpectedly, unless there was a significant issue at hand. Mr. Calloway swallowed hard, his confidence finally revealing hints of vulnerability. He adjusted his tie, casting a look at the woman in front of him, still grappling with the mystery of her identity. Richard Hayes kept his focus solely on her as he approached with purpose. He halted mere inches from her and reached out his hand. "Ms. Lawson," he remarked with clear admiration. A shared breath of astonishment swept across the room. Soft murmurs broke the silence. The employees shared bewildered looks. Ms. Lawson grasped his hand firmly, exuding a sense of calm confidence. "I appreciate you making it here on such short notice." Richard Hayes acknowledged with a nod, his eyes at last turning to Mr. Calloway. The stillness was overwhelming. Calloway's typical smirk had vanished completely. His lips parted slightly, a silent struggle for words, yet silence prevailed. Richard's voice exuded a serene confidence, yet it held an unmistakable gravity. "Are you aware of whom you have just refused service to?" Mr. Calloway parted his lips, paused momentarily, and then managed to conjure a rigid smile. A misunderstanding must have occurred." Richard interrupted him before he could complete his thought. "No, the sole confusion in this situation stems from your own lack of ability." Calloway's complexion drained of color. Richard glanced at the closest staff member. "Retrieve the financial reports for the branch from the previous quarter." The worker dashed to the rear, fully aware that hesitation was not an option. Calloway let out another uneasy laugh. "My dear sir, I can assure you that there was no malice intended." Ms. Lawson finally articulated her thoughts, her tone steady and exact. "I entered the bank, my own establishment, appearing as a regular customer, and the first action taken by your manager was to disregard me, not for any legitimate cause, but because, in his perception, I did not seem significant enough." A hush fell over the room once more. The staff hung on every word, the gravity of the revelation settling in. Richard let out a sharp breath, massaging his temples. "Calloway, are you aware that Ms. Lawson is more than just a client? She holds the position of CEO for the entire bank. She holds the authority to close this branch if she chooses to do so." The hue vanished entirely from Calloway's visage. His lips parted and shut, yet silence lingered. His body appeared to be paralyzed by disbelief. Ms. Lawson's gaze held firm. "Pray tell, Mr. Calloway, how many other patrons have you attended to in such a manner? How many have left feeling degraded simply because they did not meet your personal expectations?" Calloway's brow shimmered with perspiration. "Ms. Lawson, allow me to clarify." "There's no need for that," she interrupted. "Your actions have already taken effect." At that moment, the employee reappeared, carrying a hefty folder filled with reports, and presented it to Richard. He turned the pages, his expression growing more troubled. "This branch," he noted, "has experienced a drop in customer satisfaction over the past year. Concerns regarding inadequate service. There have been instances of clients transitioning to rival companies." His gaze rose, piercing and filled with accusation. "And now I understand why," Calloway stuttered, his hands fidgeting. "It was merely a misunderstanding. We can definitely manage this within our team." Ms. Lawson directed her gaze towards Richard. "What is our typical approach to situations like this?" Richard shut the folder with a decisive snap that sent a shiver through the atmosphere. "We dismissed them immediately." Calloway's legs almost buckled beneath him. Mr. Calloway's hands shook as he clutched the edge of the counter, his thoughts racing for an escape. His face had taken on a pallid hue. The confident smirk that once adorned it now vanished. Decades of hard work and dedication to his craft were disintegrating right in front of him. "Please," he croaked, his voice a fragile whisper, barely escaping his lips. "Surely there is a solution to this problem. Years of my life have been devoted to this bank. I have overseen this branch with great effectiveness." Ms. Lawson's demeanor stayed the same. "Efficiency," she reiterated, tilting her head ever so slightly. "Is that how you define humiliating customers? Judging them solely by their looks? Refusing essential service to an individual solely based on your subjective criteria of significance?" Calloway recoiled. "It was never personal." "It was always personal," Ms. Lawson interjected, her tone cutting through the air. "Trust is the foundation of banking, Mr. Calloway. Every individual who enters those doors deserves to be treated with respect, no matter if they are dressed in formal attire or in work boots. However, you chose to interpret power as a means of elevating yourself above others." Calloway's lips parted and shut, yet silence lingered. Richard Hayes advanced a step. "Your termination is effective immediately," he declared, his tone leaving no room for discussion. Today you will be tidying up your office space. A subtle murmur swept across the lobby. Workers remained still, exchanging anxious looks with each other. Calloway's breath was quick and uneven. This is not something you can do. This place has consumed my very existence. You've bestowed upon this place a reputation it never earned, Richard responded with a calm demeanor. And now you shall depart from it. A security officer previously stationed at the rear now advanced to the forefront. The very presence of him caused Calloway to take a hesitant step back. This is a mistake, he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. This can be resolved. I can demonstrate you had your opportunity, Ms. Lawson stated. You opted for pride instead of assistance. Every decision carries its own weight. Calloway exhaled sharply, his eyes flitting about, seeking understanding. Yet there was nothing. The staff who once adhered to his commands now averted their gaze. The onlookers who had observed the event were murmuring to one another, some nodding in disbelief. You have 10 minutes to gather your belongings, Richard stated, his voice steady and firm. Calloway released a harsh laugh, devoid of any trace of amusement. He faced the employees, his eyes filled with desperation. Is this what everyone desires? To witness my expulsion in such a manner? After all that I've contributed to this branch? No one replied. The only response he offered was silence. At last, Calloway faced the other way, his shoulders drooping in defeat. Defeat loomed over him like a dense fog. In silence, he pivoted and made his way to his office, each step deliberate and wavering. The security officer trailed closely behind. The atmosphere was thick with an unsettling quiet as the office door softly clicked shut behind him. It was only at that moment that the gravity of the recent events hung heavily in the atmosphere. Ms. Lawson let out a breath, her eyes scanning the room. To the employees gathered, she started, her tone steady yet authoritative. Let this serve as a valuable lesson. Leadership transcends the mere notion of power. It revolves around accountability. It revolves around guaranteeing that each individual who enters is accorded the respect they rightfully merit. A number of employees nodded, their faces reflecting a blend of relief and resolve. Richard Hayes surveyed his surroundings briefly before redirecting his attention to Ms. Lawson. Shall we proceed? Ms. Lawson gave a slight nod. Let us make certain this branch evolves into its true potential. Ms. Lawson faced the employees, her eyes unwavering. The heaviness of all that had just transpired lingered in the atmosphere. The tension lingered, yet an unnameable force started to emerge. A profound shift, a dawning realization that hung in the air. She inhaled deeply before uttering a word. This may seem overwhelming, she stated, her tone steady yet resolute, and I understand that many of you might be curious about what comes next. A handful of employees shared sidelong looks, their faces a blend of apprehension and intrigue. A few of them had been under Calloway's guidance for many years. Some had just come on board, yet they had swiftly sensed the gravity of his command. For the first time, they were witnessing a new approach to leadership, one that emphasized accountability rather than fear or control. The cornerstone of a successful enterprise is trust, Ms. Lawson elaborated. Trust that exists between the organization and its workforce. The bond of trust between employees and customers has been absent for far too long. But that changes now. This branch will transform into a space where everyone feels embraced. It will transform into a space free from judgment based on appearance or material possessions. A whisper swept across the gathering. A few inclined their heads in concurrence. Some, still reeling from the events that had unfolded, held their tongues. Yet not a single voice rose in opposition. Richard Hayes advanced, his keen eyes sweeping across the space. If anyone believes they cannot support this vision, he stated, his voice imbued with a subtle command, then now is the moment to express that concern. Silence enveloped the scene, as if time itself had come to a standstill. Silence enveloped the room. The stillness conveyed a profound message. Good, Ms. Lawson remarked, for change is on the horizon, regardless of our preparedness, and this transformation will not rely solely on regulations. It will be constructed upon how we engage with others, how we perceive them, and how we hold them in esteem. This will be the defining moment for this bank from now on. A young teller, a woman named Natalie, approached with a hint of hesitation. "Ms. Lawson," she murmured, her tone wavering. "Does this imply that there will be a change? Are you serious? That's quite a change." Ms. Lawson gave a slight nod. "Indeed, Natalie, it certainly does. It signifies that moving forward, you are not merely present to obey commands. Your presence contributes to a cause of significance. Your purpose is to ensure that everyone who enters these doors departs with a sense of their true worth." Natalie's eyes sparkled with a hint of relief. Several others acknowledged with a nod. The atmosphere in the room was evolving, transforming from doubt to a more powerful feeling: optimism. Richard glanced at his watch. "We have much to accomplish," he stated. "But before we proceed, Ms. Lawson, I think there's another matter we must address." Ms. Lawson followed his gaze and turned back toward the place where it had all begun. The same teller who had previously denied her assistance remained in place, his complexion ashen. He stood there, motionless since Calloway's dismissal, clearly wishing to evade any scrutiny. "Eric," Ms. Lawson said, finally addressing him directly. He took a deep breath, his fingers clenching the edge of the counter. "Ms. Lawson, I didn't intend to share something with me," she interjected, her voice steady yet firm, allowing no space for justifications. "Would your treatment of me have changed if you had been aware of my identity?" Eric paused, yet remained silent. Ms. Lawson nodded, her expression suggesting she had anticipated that all along. "That is the issue," she stated plainly, "and that is what must be altered." Eric cast his gaze downward, a wave of shame enveloping him. Ms. Lawson let out a breath. "The inquiry at hand is if you are prepared to adapt alongside it." Eric remained motionless, his heart pounding fiercely within his chest. Ms. Lawson's words bore down on him with the force of a heavy stone. For years, he had adhered to Calloway's philosophy, convinced that worth was dictated by appearances and that some customers warranted greater focus than others. Yet now, in the wake of recent events, a harsh reality unfolded before him, and it filled him with a deep sense of nausea. He began, yet the words became trapped in his throat. Ms. Lawson observed him, poised in anticipation. Her expression held no anger, no gloating, only a quiet expectation, a wordless challenge for him to confront his actions and choose the person he wished to become. Eric took a deep breath and surveyed his surroundings. The other employees observed him, some with a wary intrigue, others with barely concealed disapproval. He sensed the heaviness of their gazes, the way they scrutinized him now just as he had scrutinized customers for years. However, the distinction was striking. In this moment, he found himself under scrutiny, and it had nothing to do with his attire or financial status. The focus was on his character. "I was wrong," he confessed, his voice softer than he had meant it to be. He cleared his throat and made another attempt. "I was wrong," he declared with increased intensity this time. "I did not treat people justly. I found myself judging customers based on their appearances, overlooking the essential truth that this role is meant to prioritize service over social standing." A soft whisper spread among the employees. Some appeared taken aback, while others seemed doubtful. Yet, Ms. Lawson's demeanor remained unchanged. Eric faced the elderly man he had previously declined to assist, the same individual for whom Ms. Lawson had intervened. Embarrassment seared within him as he locked gazes with the man. "I apologize," he uttered, his tone heavy with remorse. "I ought to have assisted you the instant you approached my counter. I ought to have shown you the respect you deserve." The elderly gentleman observed him intently for a considerable time. To Eric's astonishment, he gave a nod. "It requires a noble soul to acknowledge his mistakes," he stated plainly, "yet it demands an even greater character to transform." Eric felt a constriction in his throat. He glanced over his shoulder at Ms. Lawson. "I refuse to become the type of employee that Mr. Calloway shaped me into," he declared, a sense of resolve infusing his tone. "I aspire to improve. I aspire to contribute to this transformation." Ms. Lawson paused to reflect on him for a moment. Then she gave a nod of agreement. Then show me, she said. From this moment forward, every customer who enters will receive the utmost respect, dignity, and fairness. Absolutely no exceptions, no room for excuses. Eric nodded, an unusual wave of relief enveloping him. Ms. Lawson faced the remaining employees once more. That applies to each and every one of you, she stated. This goes beyond Eric alone. This piece delves into the ethos of this financial institution. We shall improve. We will improve. A stillness enveloped the room, and gradually, the employees began to nod in agreement. Some were more reluctant than others, yet each one sensed that a significant change had just occurred. Richard Hayes, an observer of the scene, took a step forward. He expressed his confidence that all aspects had been addressed. Ms. Lawson, I have confidence in your ability to guide this branch toward a future that it can truly take pride in. Ms. Lawson gave a slight nod. I shall. With that, Richard turned to leave, but just before stepping out, he hesitated and cast a look at the elderly man. Sir, he stated, should you still desire to open that account, it would be my privilege to assist you personally. The elderly gentleman let out a hearty laugh. I value your perspective, my son, but I believe I will remain here and allow this young man to demonstrate his commitment to change. Everyone's gaze shifted back to Eric, who took a deep breath and offered a subtle nod. He advanced and motioned toward his counter. I would be delighted to assist you, he stated, his tone unwavering. The elderly man smiled and approached the counter, and as he did, an intangible change swept through the atmosphere, a feeling of rejuvenation, of potential unfolding. Ms. Lawson observed the employees as they regained their composure, the earlier tension dissipating and giving way to a new feeling, hope. After what seemed like an eternity, this place truly radiated the essence of a bank where everyone found their sense of belonging.